2:14 p.m., Westfield Mall, Café, California. The noise was louder than it needed to be. "Mom, that bag is embarrassing." Lucas didn't lower his voice. He didn't need to. The words landed cleanly, sharp enough to turn a few heads. Laughter followed, quick, polite, practiced. Cups clinked against saucers. A milk steamer hissed behind the counter. I sat still in my chair, sunlight cutting across the table, warming my hands but not my chest. I looked down at the bag resting in my lap, brown leather, soft at the corners, old but cared for. I had carried it for years without thinking twice. So this is how it sounds, I thought, when someone decides you've outlived your place. Lucas waved a hand toward it, smiling as if he were helping me. "You could have brought something nicer," he added. "People notice these things." His friends watched closely now, waiting for me to shrink, to apologize, to laugh along. I didn't. Instead, I adjusted my grip on the strap. The leather was warm from my palm, familiar. Inside the cafe, music played softly, something upbeat, out of place. Outside, shoppers moved past the glass windows, unaware of the small judgment unfolding at this table. My fingers brushed against something firm inside the bag, not the usual softness of papers or fabric, something solid, rectangular, heavy enough to press back when I touched it. Lucas leaned back in his chair, satisfied, already moving on. "Anyway," he said, glancing at his phone, "we should order." I nodded once, calm on the surface, steady in my breath. I didn't defend myself, I didn't explain. There's no need, I told myself, not yet. Because what Lucas didn't understand, what none of them did, was that this bag wasn't outdated. It was prepared. 2:27 p.m., Westfield Mall, Café, California. The crowd moved, but I stayed still. After Lucas ordered, the table filled with small talk plans for the weekend, a joke about traffic, someone complaining about prices. I listened without really listening. The mall had its own rhythm, footsteps echoing faintly through the open atrium, a child laughing somewhere near the fountain, the low hum of air conditioning working too hard against the afternoon heat. I folded my hands over my bag and rested it against my knee. The comment replayed once, then faded. Embarrassing. It wasn't the word that lingered. It was the certainty behind it. The way Lucas had already decided what I was allowed to be in that space. I studied his face as he spoke, confident, relaxed, unaware. He had grown comfortable correcting me in public, finishing my sentences, choosing for me. I wondered when that shift had happened, or if I'd simply allowed it by staying quiet. The server set a cup in front of me, ceramic warm against my fingers. "Anything else?" she asked kindly. I shook my head. My voice felt unnecessary. I glanced around the cafe, polished floors, clean lines, storefronts arranged carefully to invite spending and movement. I had walked these halls countless times, usually unnoticed, blending into the background like part of the furniture. Invisible can be useful, I reminded myself. Lucas laughed again, louder this time. "You're quiet today, Mom." "I'm thinking," I replied. It was the truth. My fingers tightened briefly on the bag strap, feeling that solid edge inside once more. The weight grounded me. Whatever embarrassment he thought I carried wasn't mine alone. It belonged to a story he didn't know yet. And stories, I'd learned, have a way of surfacing, whether invited or not. 5:48 a.m., Northern California. Memory arrives before the sun. Long before cafes and polished storefronts, my mornings began in quieter places. I married young and learned early how fragile comfort could be. When my husband and I first talked about money, it wasn't about luxury. It was about margin, how to survive lean months, how to plan beyond what others could see. We worked steadily. He trusted my patience. I trusted his resolve. While friends upgraded cars and homes, we invested in land, leases, and things that took time to mature. I learned to read contracts the way some people read faces slowly, looking for what wasn't said. When opportunities appeared, they were rarely glamorous. They were practical, predictable, often overlooked. After he passed, the world expected me to retreat. Instead, responsibility clarified my focus. I kept records meticulously. I asked questions others didn't bother with. I learned which advisors listened and which preferred applause. Over the years, assets layered quietly, interests compounding, properties consolidating, structures designed to endure without attention. Lucas was still young then. I never spoke to him about numbers. I spoke about work ethic, restraint, patience. He learned confidence from the world outside our home. I learned caution from watching it. People mistook my habits for limitation. Same bag, same routines, same calm presence. I let them. There is safety in being underestimated. Wealth, when handled correctly, doesn't announce itself. It waits. As the years passed, my life looked simple by design, but beneath that simplicity lived intention, documentation, and foresight built over decades. Back in the cafe, the memory faded with the morning light. I lifted my cup slowly and returned to the present. Everything Lucas thought he understood about me was built on absence, and absence, when chosen, can be powerful. 11:22 a.m., Northern California. Confidence wears familiar clothes. Lucas had always been comfortable in public spaces. He moved through them as if they were extensions of his own living room, quick smiles, easy gestures, a voice that assumed agreement before it finished speaking. Watching him now in the mall cafe, I recognized that same confidence polished by age and expectation. The early red flags hadn't arrived as cruelty. They arrived as convenience. He ordered for me without asking. He spoke over small details, filling pauses I left open on purpose. When servers approached, his answers came too quickly, as if efficiency were a virtue in itself. I noticed how often he glanced at my bag, how his eyes lingered there with faint amusement before returning to his phone. People notice these things, he said lightly once, nodding toward it. Image matters. He didn't mean harm, not consciously. He meant alignment, belonging. He meant to help me fit into a version of the world he had decided was correct. I watched how he positioned himself slightly forward, always angled toward attention. He spoke about expansion, opportunity, connections, words designed to move fast. He didn't ask how I felt about any of it. He didn't need to. He assumed my silence meant approval. That assumption was the habit that concerned me most. I stirred my coffee slowly, listening more than I spoke. Speed hides intention, I reminded myself. Lucas liked momentum. He liked decisions that felt inevitable once spoken aloud. He liked being seen as the one who knew best. As he laughed again, dismissing something trivial, I felt the familiar calm settle in my chest. I had seen this pattern before, not just in him, but in others who believed proximity to control meant ownership of it. The bag rested against my leg, heavier than it looked, and Lucas was beginning to believe weight was only visible when it announced itself. 1:08 p.m., Northern California. The first line crossed quietly. The first betrayal didn't sound like betrayal. It sounded like help. Lucas leaned back in his chair, phone resting face down on the table, and said, "I took care of a few things for you." His tone was casual, confident, meant to reassure. "Just some arrangements. Saves you the trouble." He smiled as if he'd already done me a favor I hadn't asked for. I asked what he meant. He waved a hand lightly. "Tenant stuff, scheduling, a couple of renewals." He didn't name details. He summarized outcomes, the way people do when they want the conversation to end before questions begin. I felt the familiar pull to nod and move on. Instead, I waited. "You used my name?" I asked. "Of course," he said, surprised. "That's normal." He added quickly, "Nothing binding, just practical." Practical is a word that smooths over a lot of things. He spoke about momentum, how delays cost money, how decisions needed to be made quickly in a place like this. "You don't need to be involved in every small thing," he said. "I've got it handled." Handled. The word landed with weight. I looked past him to the flow of shoppers, the soft echo of footsteps on tile. This is how access changes hands, I thought. Not with force, with permission assumed. I asked to see the paperwork. He hesitated only a second, then smiled again. "I'll send a summary," he said. "The full documents are long, boring." I didn't argue. I didn't insist. I simply noted the shift, my role reduced to acknowledgement, my questions framed as inconvenience. When the check arrived, he reached for it automatically. I let him. The bag rested against my leg, solid and quiet. That was the first time he acted as if authority had already moved, and the first time I understood how easily silence could be spent. 3:42 p.m., Northern California. Distance learned my name. The second betrayal arrived the way fog does, slow, quiet, and hard to notice until it's everywhere. Emails that once came promptly began arriving late. When they did, they were shorter, cleaner. Decisions were already made by the time they reached me, dressed up as updates instead of questions. Lucas called it efficiency. I recognized it as separation. I heard about changes from other people first. A store manager thanked me for approving a renovation I'd never seen. A vendor mentioned a schedule I hadn't discussed. Each time my name had traveled ahead of me, signing doors closed behind it. When I asked Lucas about it, he sounded almost offended by my concern. "I didn't want to bother you," he said gently, as if protecting me. "You've got enough going on." Enough going on, another phrase that sounds kind until it removes you. At a café overlooking the main corridor, I asked directly for full access to the tenant agreements. Lucas smiled into his coffee. "You don't really need all that," he said. "It's handled." There it was again. Handled meant finished. Handled meant not mine. Around us, shoppers moved freely, unaware of the quiet rearrangement happening above them. This is how people disappear without leaving, I thought. Not erased, edited. I noticed how others began copying Lucas first, how conversations paused when I joined, then resumed without rewinding. Authority had shifted without announcement, like furniture moved overnight. That evening, at home, I set my bag on the table and opened it slowly. Inside, beneath the worn lining, the folder rested firm, patient, unchanged. Not yet, I told myself, but soon, because distance, once engineered, always escalates, and I needed to be certain before I closed the gap. 5:18 p.m., Northern California. The moment clarity stops negotiating. The third betrayal arrived without disguise. We were standing near the mall's central atrium, late afternoon light pouring down from the glass ceiling, scattering across polished floors and storefront windows. Lucas didn't look at me when he spoke. He adjusted his jacket, glanced at his phone, and said it like a scheduling note. "Mom, this next phase is sensitive," he began. "It's better if you step back for now." I waited, letting the words settle. "Step back," I repeated silently. "Not temporary, not specific, just removal, softened by tone." "I've always been involved," I said. My voice was steady, not defensive, just true. Lucas sighed, the way people do when they think patience makes them right. "That was before," he replied. "This is bigger, more complex." Bigger meant louder, younger, controlled. "Trust me," he added, "you'll be more comfortable not dealing with this." Comfort. Another word meant to close doors. Around us, shoppers moved past with bags and laughter, unaware of the quiet line being crossed. Lucas had already turned his body slightly away from me, conversation finished in his mind. In that moment, every delayed email, every filtered update, every decision made without me aligned into certainty. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been replaced politely, efficiently, and on purpose. I nodded once. "All right," I said. My calm surprised even me. That evening at home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I set my bag on the table and reached inside. My fingers brushed the edge of the folder again, solid, familiar. This isn't about being respected, I thought. It's about ownership. The breaking point didn't come with anger. It came with decision. 7:42 p.m., Northern California. Quiet is where resolve settles. I arrived home just as the sky deepened into evening, the last light slipping behind the hills like a door closing gently. I placed my keys in their bowl and stood still for a moment, listening to the familiar hush of the house. No voices, no explanations waiting, just space. I set my bag on the dining table and removed my coat, smoothing the sleeve out of habit. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood-steady, dependable things. This isn't shock, I thought. This is clarity. I opened the bag and laid the folder out carefully. Documents rested inside the way they always had, ordered, dated, complete. I didn't rush. I never had. Years of habit guided my hands as I aligned edges and checked tabs. There was comfort in the ritual, not nostalgia assurance. I sat and wrote a short list on a yellow pad, dates, meetings, approvals that hadn't included me. Each line felt like restoring balance rather than preparing a fight. Quiet doesn't mean absent, I reminded myself. It means watching. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere a dog barked once, then went still. I poured a glass of water and drank slowly, my breathing even. Lucas believed distance would soften my footing. He believed time would dull my authority. He was wrong about both. I slid the folder back into the bag and placed it by the door, ready, not for confrontation, for accuracy. As I turned off the light, a simple thought settled in, firm and unshaken. Preparation doesn't announce itself, it proceeds. 8:36 a.m., Northern California. Preparation has a rhythm. Morning arrived without ceremony. Pale light slipped across the kitchen floor as I dressed the way I always did. Comfortable shoes, a pressed blouse, my bag resting where I'd left it by the door. There's no need to look different, I thought. The truth already is. The office was modest and quiet, the kind that values listening over display. The man across the desk didn't interrupt me. He let the silence settle between questions, then asked the right ones. I placed the folder on the desk and opened it slowly, page by page, letting the order speak for itself. Leases, titles, signatures aligned across decades. He paused at one document longer than the others. These interests, he said carefully, were structured to remain discreet. He looked up. Including the mall. I nodded once. No pride, just confirmation. We spoke in specifics, authority, timelines, disclosures, what required notice, what did not. He explained how ownership travels when it's recorded correctly, how leverage appears when assumptions meet paper. I listened, pen still, absorbing the cadence of certainty. Accuracy doesn't hurry, I reminded myself. When he finished, he closed the folder and slid it back to me. They may believe arrangements are already final, he said. They are, I replied, just not for them. Outside, the air was cool and clean. I walked to my car, unhurried, the folder secured inside my bag. The city moved on, unaware of how quietly things were aligning. Preparation doesn't raise its voice. It tightens bolts. It checks records. It waits. And waiting, I had learned, is how truth gathers its weight. 11:58 a.m., Northern California. The day tightens. By late morning, the mall felt different. Not louder, not busier, just expectant. Sunlight spilled through the atrium glass, catching on railings and tiled floors, turning everything a little too bright. I arrived early and took a seat near the café, my bag set neatly at my feet. Early is where clarity lives, I thought. Lucas moved through the space with familiar ease, greeting shop managers, laughing at small talk, checking his phone as if it answered only to him. He didn't see me at first. When he did, his smile appeared on instinct, then paused, recalibrating. "Didn't think you'd be here today," he said lightly, already half turned away. "I like to see things before they start," I replied. My voice stayed even. He nodded, satisfied, and continued on, issuing quick directions that landed because they always had. Staff listened. Vendors waited. Assumptions hummed like background music. I watched the clock above the directory tick forward, steady and indifferent. A manager approached my table with a clipboard, hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Miss Kensington, are we proceeding after the noon announcement?" "Yes," I said, "after." Across the atrium, Lucas glanced over, curiosity sharpening. "Announcement?" he asked when he reached me again, tone casual, eyes searching for context he didn't have. "Routine," I said, returning his word. "Nothing that affects your day-to-day." His laugh came too quickly. "Good," he said. "Everything's already set." The clock clicked to 12. The ambient music softened, conversations thinned. A hush settled, not imposed but discovered. I adjusted the strap of my bag and felt the familiar solidity inside. This is where paper steps forward, I thought. The announcement was about to begin. 12:04 p.m., Northern California, when truth is read aloud. The announcement didn't come with fanfare. It arrived on paper. A senior manager stepped onto the small platform near the atrium rail, a slim folder in her hands. The mall seemed to lean inward, sound lowering on its own. "Before we proceed," she said calmly, "there is a custodial notice to acknowledge." Her eyes found mine. I nodded once. Pages turned. The sound was precise. "Effective immediately," she continued, "primary ownership and governing authority of this property rests with Miss Clara May Kensington." A brief pause. "Filed, recorded, in force." Lucas laughed, quick, reflexive. "That's not right," he said, still smiling for the room. "There must be a mistake." "There isn't," I replied gently. My voice carried without effort. "The structure predates recent management changes. Consent was not required." The manager read on. "All leases, permissions, and operational decisions proceed at the owner's discretion." She looked up. "Miss Kensington?" I stepped forward. Light from the glass ceiling warmed my face. "This wasn't done for today," I said. "It was done to protect continuity." I didn't look at Lucas when I added, "and to clarify authority." Silence settled, not shock, but recognition. A vendor adjusted his stance. A store lead folded her clipboard closed, eyes thoughtful. Lucas's smile thinned, then stilled. "Why wasn't I told?" he asked, softer now. "Because it wasn't necessary," I said. The folder closed. "We'll proceed as directed," the manager said. Music waited. Staff waited. The mall mind stood exactly as it always had, only now aligned with the truth that had been quietly holding it together. Paper doesn't argue, I thought. It stands. 12:19 p.m. Northern California. When a room decides who it follows. The mall didn't erupt. It recalibrated. Conversations softened, then stopped. People turned not toward Lucas, but toward the quiet center that had just been named. Authority, once assumed, now had an address. Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice as if familiarity could still negotiate. "Mom," he said, the word practiced, "this doesn't have to be public. We can talk privately." "We are talking," I replied evenly. "Public is where clarity belongs." A leasing coordinator approached with a tablet, eyes flicking between us. "Ms. Kensington," she asked, "would you like us to proceed with the renewals?" "Yes," I said. "Please ensure all documents reflect current ownership and review timelines." She nodded and moved away. The simple compliance landed heavier than argument. Lucas exhaled sharply. "You're embarrassing me," he said, attempting a smile for the onlookers. "There's no need to—" "There is," I interrupted gently. "When boundaries are crossed quietly, they must be restored clearly." A store manager near the railing murmured approval. Another folded his arms, studying Lucas with new curiosity. The ambient music resumed at a lower volume, tentative as if testing the air. "You could have told me," Lucas said, softer now. "I did," I answered, meeting his eyes for the first time since the notice. "In questions you chose not to answer." Silence answered for him. The senior manager returned. "Miss Kensington," she said, "your guests are ready." "My guests," I repeated. and felt the words settle into place. I turned to the atrium. "Thank you for your patience," I said. "We'll continue." People moved again, this time with intention. Lucas stepped aside, no longer centered, no longer directing. The confrontation ended without raised voices or triumph, just acknowledgement. And acknowledgement once given rearranges everything. 3:47 p.m. Northern California. Consequences don't rush. Lucas didn't leave right away. He hovered near the edge of the atrium, phone in hand, smile rehearsed and unused. The mall continued around him, measured footsteps, registers chiming, escalators carrying people past without pause. Where attention once gathered easily, it now flowed elsewhere. I watched from a distance as the shift completed itself. Department heads approached the senior manager, not Lucas. Vendors waited for confirmations addressed to me. A leasing assistant asked where to send revised documents. Each interaction was small, professional, undeniable. Authority doesn't announce itself, I thought. It's recognized. Lucas attempted conversation twice, once with the store owner, once with a consultant who used to defer to him. Both exchanges ended quickly, polite but non-committal. Language changed first. "We'll review." "Ownership needs to approve." "Let's confirm timelines." His name appeared less, then not at all. Later, a board representative pulled him aside near the glass railing. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the posture, shoulders angled away, voices low, careful. Lucas nodded too often. He glanced toward me once, then looked down. Confidence, when unsupported, turns inward. By early evening, calendars were updated, roles clarified, temporary permissions paused pending review. Nothing dramatic, nothing punitive, just structure returning to its proper shape. Lucas left without saying goodbye. No one followed him. No one needed to. I felt no satisfaction in it, only balance. What had been taken lightly was now examined. What had been assumed was now documented. Consequences had arrived the way they usually do when they matter, quietly, publicly, and for good. 6:18 p.m., Northern California. Healing doesn't announce itself. That evening, after the mall lights softened and the last stores pulled their gates closed, I stayed behind alone. The atrium felt different without the crowd footsteps, replaced by a low hum, polished floors, reflecting light instead of faces. I sat on a bench near the café where laughter had stung earlier that day and rested my bag beside me. My hands loosened for the first time in weeks. I hadn't noticed how tightly I'd been holding myself, shoulders lifted, breath measured, patience carrying more weight than it should. Sitting there, I let it go. Not all at once, just enough. I thought about Lucas, not with anger, but with clarity. Love doesn't excuse dismissal, and family doesn't justify erasure. That understanding settled quietly, like something long overdue, finally finding its place. I didn't need an apology to heal. I needed acknowledgement of myself. I opened my bag and checked the contents by habit. Documents, keys, notes written in my own hand, the same bag he had laughed at. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was simply mine again, a container, not a shield. As I walked the length of the atrium, I noticed details I'd missed before: the warm grain of the railing, the echo that carried gently upward, the way the space held calm when nothing was demanded of it. Ownership, I realized, isn't just legal, it's emotional. It's knowing you don't have to explain why you're here. Outside, the air cooled. I breathed it in fully and felt something return, not pride, not relief, but peace. And peace, once reclaimed, doesn't argue. It stays. 7:02 a.m., Northern California. Morning doesn't ask permission. Morning light reached the kitchen slowly, stretching across the table where my bag rested, exactly where I had left it. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the day assemble itself. Cars passing, shutters lifting, ordinary life moving forward without waiting for anyone's approval. I hadn't changed anything about myself. Not the way I dressed, not the way I spoke, not the way I carried that bag. What had changed was quieter than that. The world had adjusted around the truth instead. I thought about how easily people mistake restraint for weakness, simplicity for absence, silence for surrender. I had lived long enough to know better. Some things are kept modest because they are valuable. Some voices are quiet because they are certain. Lucas would learn his lesson in his own time or not at all. That was no longer my responsibility. Parenthood teaches you many things. One of them is when to stop explaining. Love does not require you to make yourself smaller to be understood. I picked up my bag and felt its familiar weight. It had carried documents, keys, years of preparation. Now it carried something else closure, not the loud kind, the lasting kind. Before leaving the house, I paused at the door and allowed myself one final thought, simple and unadorned. Never underestimate those who move quietly. Never laugh at what you don't understand. Some of us aren't waiting to be invited. We're waiting for the right moment to stand. And when we do, we don't raise our voices. We don't need to.